74 years ago today, that is June 25th, North Korean tanks crossed the 13th parallel, the boundary with South Korea, to trigger a war that lasted 3 years with millions killed, mostly civilians. On this edition of Issues and Insiders, we take a look at the Korean War through the lens of the camera. Hello and welcome. You're watching Issues and Insiders. I'm Min Sunhee. The Korean War of the 1950s has served as a backdrop of a number of screen productions both here and elsewhere. That being said, to mark the 74th anniversary of its tragic beginning on this day, we touch upon its portrayal through the lens of the camera. For this, I have filmmaker and Professor Jae Soh from the Seoul Institute of the Arts here in the studio. Professor Soh, welcome back.
Nice to be back.
I also have filmmaker and actor Arnold Chun live on the line. Director Chun, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Right, Professor Soh, we'll start here in the studio. Let's begin with the significance of the anniversary screening of the Korean War film, Taegukgi, the Brotherhood of War.
I know, I can't believe it's already 20 years.
20 years,
yeah.
Yes.
Well, it was a significant film that came out in 2004, basically, just before the anniversary of the, well, not the anniversary, but the Memorial Day of, June 25th, which is today. It was like, I think it was released on June 6th of 2004, and it immediately became an instant hit. I think there was like over 11 million people that went to see it, and it had some big stars in it. It was directed by Kang Jae-gyu, who's a big director who is known for movies like Shiri, but it had Chang Dong-gun and Won Bin. And it was basically a tragic story about two brothers that ended up in the war fighting each other. So sort of a tragic situation with all the characters that we know for big actors sort of acting in this kind of amazing movie that in its day, I believe Saving Private Ryan came out in the 90s, and the style of the movie is very gritty, a lot of shaking cameras, and it had a very realistic portrayal of the Korean War. So it really impacted audiences back then. So Taegukgi was, in a way, like probably the most memorable film of that era. I think it beat out Chilmido, which was also about sort of South Korean army people trying to go infiltrate the North. So, but when it came out, it was a very impactful film. For sure.
Right. And before we delve further into the portrayal of the Korean War on screen productions, Professor, so how effective is the strategy of re-releasing popular screen productions?
It seems like a trend right now in Korea. There's a lot of old movies that are being released. Most of them have been foreign films, like Eternal Sunshine or Before Sunrise, these movies. So it's kind of rare that a Korean film has been kind of re-released this way. I believe when they showed it at the end of last month, they showed a 4K restoration version of Taegukgi, so it's a higher resolution copy that they showed, and they also brought back the director, the actors, and sort of the main artists that work behind the cinematographer, things like that. But for the most part, the re-release is more of an event, and it's kind of a symbolic sort of thing that's happening more than a business opportunity, because I don't think people will go flock to see a movie they already know that they could see on Netflix and things like that. So it's a symbolic gesture, but at the same time, I think it being, June 25th is when the Korean War started, it's a good reminder of sort of our very violent past that we had.
Right, indeed, I'll have to agree. Professor, so do you believe changes in society have perhaps affected the portrayal of the Korean War in domestic films?
Oh, for sure. Right after the Korean War, the domestic sort of film production started up again around 1960. There were a lot of imports after 1953. Basically Korea was destroyed, so the film industry along with it. So they had to reestablish that. But after they started doing, there was a period where, because of military dictatorship that we had at the time, and also just the horror of the Korean War, there were a lot of anti-communist, anti-North Korean films that are being made. There was sort of, I guess today you would say they're kind of action movies of the day, but the bad guys were always the North Koreans. And it led that sort of making those movies led up to about 1970, 80. And then what happens with a lot of movie making is it reflects the sort of the inter-Korean relations that we have. And we started to, I just remember when the movie JSA came out in 2000, that's when President Kim Dae-jung, he visited North Korea, and there was kind of a thawing between North and South at that point. And it was a movie where they portrayed North Korean soldiers in a very humanistic way. And I remember it was a huge hit. But I was thinking if that same movie, JSA, came out, Joint Security Area, came out today, where we have sort of very bad relations with the North, it probably wouldn't have done well. So movies kind of reflect the sort of social, political situation of Korea. And there was also a lot of filmmakers who were kind of frustrated making the anti-communist movies. So I'd say in the 90s, To the Starry Island and movies like Spring in My Hometown started to come out that kind of explored the cruelty of the war, not portraying North and South ideologically, but basically war being bad. And then also there's more of leftist-leaning governments coming in where some of the movies like Welcome to Dongmakgo, things like that, those movies portrayed North Koreans in a sympathetic manner. So today, our political sort of stances are very volatile right now, left and right. And so there have been anti-communist movies that have come out since, but depending on the political atmosphere of the times, the movies really reflect that as well.
Right. Meanwhile, Director Chun, what can you tell us about the depiction of the Korean War in Hollywood films?
Fantastic question. I would say, and over the 20 years that I've been working in the business of Hollywood, the footprint is rather small. You have a handful of films in the 50s and the 60s that depicted the Korean War, but in terms of the modern filmmaking world, outside of Devotion, which was made in 2022, but that's from the perspective of US Navy pilots, there isn't really anything that resonates to the scale of like Taegukgi, as Professor Soh mentioned. I have not seen one yet, and it's fascinating because of the fanfare of just Korean culture right now, Korean music and Korean food and Korean drama. This is a topic that really has not been touched by the Hollywood studios to this day.
Right. Which is why perhaps, Director Chun, you have a current project that is based against the backdrop of the Korean War itself. Could you tell us a bit about your current work?
Yeah, it's inspired by my father's story. My father was an orphan during the Korean War. At 6 years old, his mother abandoned him. His older brother, who was 16, was captured by the North Korean army, forced to fight for them. And the story is about survival, hope, and faithfulness, in the sense that my uncle never gave up looking for my father at the armistice of the war. He continued on and kept searching for my father and found him in an orphanage in 1954. And so I had the honor and the privilege of talking to my uncle and my father before my uncle passed away 14 years ago. As a child, I didn't have the context to understand the gravity of the story and the environment, the time setting, and the things that they had to endure. I was just a 13-year-old kid wanting to play basketball with my friends and go hang out at the mall and play video games and find a pretty girl to date. I thought that the guilt tripping was something as a curse or some sort of, mythical way to punish me, because my father was telling me, I only got my first pair of shoes when I was 16 years old, so don't complain. But when I had heard the gravity of the entire story 14 years ago, it definitely resonated with me in the sense that this could be a complete beginning, middle, and end feature film that displays a complex array of just the emotions and the characters that went through the Korean War, but from the perspective of children. And that's never been done till this day. I mean, we have a plethora of Korean War movies, and they're excellent, made by some of the best Korean directors, but yet there still hasn't been one that's been done from the eyes of children. And so my project and the story of my father is a love letter to my parents' generation and telling the story of the Korean War from the perspective of 4, 6 to 8-year-old children.
Right, wow, I see. Director Chun, do you suppose the war film genre itself remains relevant in today's society?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if we're talking just about the story of these children and what they endured, that is happening right now. Whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Israel, Palestine, whether it was Syria a few years ago, it continues to happen. And I think having a cinematic narrative story that resonates from that perspective, I think reminds us of just the tragedies of war and why we should try to do what we can to prevent that from happening again, especially for children who oftentimes are victims in the sense that they don't have any kind of power, they don't have any voice, they don't have any way to rally leaders and perpetrators of war to stop doing acts of violence in that way. I think war stories have the ability to transcend and talk to us as members of society of the tragedies that can happen, the trauma, the generational trauma that gets passed on. And I think that it's so important to create stories that tell these tales and tell these narratives so that we can not only pass them on to the next generation, but we can remind ourselves in some way and hope to not repeat history again.
Right, of course. And speaking about storytelling, Professor, so is there a trait that defines the Korean depiction of its war on screens?
That's a really good question. But you know, as a filmmaker myself, I do think domestically the movies that are being made they go through sort of like this prism of whoever is making it, their political stance on it. So what really happened, I don't think there's a way to dramatize or recreate that situation, the suffering that occurred, as you know, Director Chun just mentioned, the orphans. A lot of people don't discuss that, but after the Korean War, I believe there were tens of thousands of orphans that nobody cared about. They're just kind of living off the streets, and the U.S. Army was picking them up. So the Korean movies here, as he mentioned, they only sort of grapple onto a historical event, and it has to do with like conflict within the family structure, this destruction of the family. But what I find at the same time, it's not a realistic depiction. I think there's no way even a documentary could show what really happened during the war. But in terms of a human interest story, I think the best movies that we've seen have to do with just human suffering and redemption. The stories have a very good story arc for both the characters and the entire movie. And I would say, just kind of looking at all the past movies, you know, if you go back to the 50s, you would have movies like Five Marines or the Non-Returning Marine, all these movies that were very gritty for its time. And then looking at it from the prism of political sort of things, I would say the best kind of pro South Korea, anti-North Korea movies that came out at the time would be something like Operation Chromite or Into the Fire. Those are movies recently made. Recently would be like at least 10 years ago, which is pretty far away. And then the sort of the pro-North Korean movies like JSA or Welcome to Tongmakgol, and sort of the movies that concentrate now on sort of the suffering of the both sides would be like Frontline is another good example of a movie like that. The Long Way Home, 서부전선 is the name. That has more of a sort of an ironic, comical take on it. And I think Taegukgi is one of the better films that kind of, some people look at it through the political prism, but at the same time, I think what really made it work is it's a story about two family members that meet on the, you know, in front of like war, and they almost kill each other, and then one sacrifices, and the hero of the story is the younger brother who sort of tells it, and it really shows you the tragedy of the fact that we're still divided as one country. We have two different governments that still technically were at war. So I think movies, in a way, is the final hope. I think movies could show the sort of suffering we went through, and also maybe offer a solution to how the two Koreas could exist together peacefully.
Right, hopefully, of course. Director Chun, is there a screen production that you personally believe well relays the brutal repercussions of warfare to a very general audience?
Professor Soh, you took the words right out of my mouth when it came to Saving Private Ryan. It's one of the most realistic portrayals of World War II in terms of D-Day that I've seen. And Spielberg, I think, brought so much raw realism in the experiences of what the soldiers had to go through on the screen. It was riveting. I mean, I think it was something that really just had never been done before on that scale. And it really showed you, as Professor Soh mentioned, the suffering that so many of these U.S. soldiers went through on D-Day. At the same time, a very complex inner conflict between the members of that platoon and their journey to go save this random individual that they were assigned to go and find. Just the entire production itself was so amazingly well done. You could tell the research and the authenticity and the attention to detail and the things that were put into it. Director Spielberg really wanted you to feel like you were there in that moment and to understand the gravity, what those soldiers went through and what they sacrificed and how they had to fight through all of those different obstacles and to overcome and eventually complete their mission. Platoon is another one by Oliver Stone. I think a Vietnam War like that, a Vietnam War picture like that has not really been done to that scale outside of Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket, but that's a very different take on it. But all those three films are just so incredible in showing you the inner workings of not only the military, but at the same time, what it's like on the battlefield and just what the soldiers go through. And there's a relatability there that I think transcends beyond if you're a soldier or not, because the rawness of their emotions and the bonds that they have between their brothers in that unit that are broken and oftentimes, come to have to sacrifice for each other in order to win the battle or save a life is very palpable in a sense. And I think those films resonate with me still to this day. And they're pieces of cinema that you can continue to watch because they're so realistic in just the way that they were made. And many veterans, like my father, who is also a Vietnam veteran that watches them, will say that there's so much that they capture that they oftentimes either get choked up and start reminiscing about their own experiences and how it felt like in that moment. And I think that's a testament to how well those films were made.
Right, and staying with such films, Professor, so aside from Taegukgi, the Brotherhood of War, what Korean film do you believe well delivers the pain of the war itself?
There's so many. Should I talk about the ones that are coming out that have to do with North Korea?
That would be perfect.
So there are three films that are coming out soon. One is called 1971 Hijack, and it's based on a real story about a South Korean person that basically hijacked a airliner to go to North Korea. I think he actually blew up a grenade inside, so it did much damage to a lot of the passengers and one of the pilots. But that has Ha Jung-woo in it, and it's kind of a thriller that's coming out pretty soon. I think it's the end of this month. And then we have this movie called 탈주, which is called, and translated as Escape. And that one is basically Lee Jae-woon and Kyu Go-an, two of the big young actors of today. That's also kind of North Korean themed. It's about a North Korean soldier that wants to, come to South Korea for freedom. And then ironically, there's a kind of a Korean CIA agent that's trying to track him down and stop him for some reason. And there's a documentary that's coming out. I think it's going to be an excellent one. It's directed by Song Won-gun. And basically, he made a movie called My Name is Kim Bok-dong, and that was a very political documentary. But this new movie is called Panmunjang, and it's about the history of basically what Panmunjang is. And a lot of people don't know this, but the tourists that come to Korea when they visit Panmunjang, it's like every other country could go visit it, but the people that cannot go there is South Koreans. And as you know, because at the time, we did not sign an armistice agreement with North Korea. It was signed by the United Nations, America, North Korea, and China. And Syngman Rhee said, I don't want to sign any agreements. So ironically, Panmunjang's that one place between the two borders where people meet. Our country people cannot go there. And the people that man there are North Korean MPs and South Korean MPs. So it's going to be a documentary about basically how that came about. There are a lot of murders that happened there, a lot of sad, tragic things. So, it's a documentary. I think a lot of people will be eye-opening to kind of see sort of what's happening right now in between the South and the North.
Right, given the tensions as we speak. Director Chun, simply speaking, what do you suppose makes a good war film?
Well, firstly, war pictures are extremely expensive to make. Granted, if there was a healthy budget in place, I think a lot of it comes down to the preparation and the research that goes into depicting whatever war, conflict that you're trying to give to the audience. And I think first and foremost, the attention to detail when it comes to the setting, recreating those time periods are oftentimes very difficult. At the same time, there has to be, I believe, a relatability to the situation at hand and what the characters are going through. I think action for the sake of just action doesn't really resonate in the sense of having explosions and aircraft and tanks and artillery and all these things that are going off and creating explosions and destroying things. It's just unnecessarily plethora of enjoying violence in that sense. But you have to have a point of view for the audience to see the character that they can connect with and relate to, and what goes on in their journey to obtain and complete that mission, if that's the storyline that you're portraying. But ultimately, it's a number of different factors. I don't know if you could sum it up in just one word, but if you have a compelling story and you have the budget that can recreate and present that world and that environment to a very high level of authenticity, and as well as the composition of the music that comes with it, and as well as the other ancillary components with making the story and the mission in terms of the war picture come to life, I think those are things that really resonate as far as a piece of cinema that you can watch over and over and over again. And so that's my opinion on that.
Can you expect to see some of that in your film, Children of War, in the near future then?
Absolutely. Probably not, gigantic explosions in action, but as far as heartfelt story and just this perspective of these children surviving at that time, you better get your tissue box out because it's going to be a tearjerker for sure.
We'll be looking forward to that. All right, Director Chun, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts from the US. And Professor Soh here in studio, thank you very much for your insights.
My pleasure.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for this edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.